All right, this week I have a very special guest. Somebody whose gear I've used over the years, someone who I run into on a fairly regular basis at trade shows, but someone who has kind of developed an aura around his name and personality. I'm going to be talking to Mr. Suit and Tie Guy. Welcome to the podcast, Suit. How are you doing?
I'm fine, Darwin.
Thank you so much for taking some time this evening to chat. I've got about 1 million questions to ask you, so I'm kind of raring to go. But first of all, I'm wondering if you could just give a really quick overview on your moniker.
Well, first of all, I wanted to thank you for the very kind introduction. And basically, my name is Suit and Tie Guy because I was told that my name was Suit and Tie Guy 20 years ago, and I just lived with it. So that's my name.
Sure, it's a really distinctive thing, and you've done some neat stuff with iconography and with sort of like the typefaces you use, and it's really become a kind of a thing. And quite frankly, when I see you at trade shows, you're always wearing a suit and tie, so you're like immediately identifiable.
I am a walking advertisement for myself. So,
well,
and it's always been that way. That's why those people named me that when they did.
Sure, there you go. So you were actually a suit and tie wearing guy before you got the name?
Yeah, for some reason I don't wear a tie every day, but anytime people are gonna, when I go out in public, I like to.
That's cool.
But yeah, I always performed music under that name back like in the 90s when I was working in publishing, and then from publishing and pre-press, I moved into I worked at a television station in the audio department of a TV station. So I mixed audio during the newscasts and had to also do some screen graphics and whatnot. Those who know me know that like one of my interests is news dissection and criticism and alt media and whatnot. And one of the reasons why these things fascinate me is because before I built synthesizers, the most interesting thing that paid me money was mastering records. And then before that, the most interesting thing that paid me money was working in TV news. And then I also worked at a newspaper as well. So I saw news from both the print and the broadcast end. I wish everybody could have that experience because I think that they would be much more skeptical and actually like adversarial and belligerent about the media that they consume.
Right. Well, so you actually really got to see sort of like the making of the news from the back door. And I can imagine that makes you pretty skeptical. What were the kinds of things that you saw that irked you the most?
I was bothered by on the newspaper side of it, the print end, I was bothered by the way that wire stories displayed their slant by the way that information was loaded into them. The author of a wire story from like AP or Reuters or Knight Ridder or whatever will load the information that they want people to see at the front of the story because they know that the story is going to be cut from the back.
Oh, right.
So and then like I was a paginator. I laid out the paper, right? Mm-hmm. I laid out the paper and I also wrote captions for photos, mm-hmm. and I wrote headlines, and I wrote or edited headlines or whatever. And so I actually was considered editorial staff. I mean, it's not a graphics job when you're doing that. You have to have an exercise judgment and then run it by the editor.
Sure.
And I was bothered by, sometimes I would go through stories with the editor and be like, look, I don't like the way this story's loaded. Let's move this paragraph to here and this paragraph to here and whatnot. I was able to correct some of the things that I saw coming through. Also, I don't like the terms red state or blue state, and I worked really hard to get that language out of any headlines that I authored while I was there. So I'm proud of that.
That's cool. Yeah.
And the news, like the TV news, broadcast news, is more interesting from like a critical point of view because newspaper people generally are fairly competent. At least the ones that I worked with, even at the small town newspaper, was the Pekin Daily Times, which is an AP award-winning newspaper, believe it or not. And they really, they really had their act together. But it was working in TV that I saw that, like, yeah, these people that read the news, they can't even spell. Okay, like I was offended by their lack of ability to use the English language when they had to write things themselves. And yeah, so I mean that's where it starts. But like the whole thing.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because when you think about it, there's no such thing as a face in newspaper land, right? Or not much of one. So you don't get the job because you look right.
No, you do not. But looks are pretty important on TV. So obviously there are a lot of pretty faces. But I could go on about this all day. But we need to talk.
I know. I just really get fascinated because one of the things that always blows me away is the backgrounds that people bring to the work that they do and the art that they do. So let's jump ahead, and then we may come back and revisit some of this because I'm curious. But
before we go on, I'll leave you with one thing, and this should be with the rest of the information in the podcast, is that if you're ever suspicious that the news media is intentionally lying to you, back up because they're not competent enough for that, okay? They're lazy. They rely on their government sources.
Right.
They don't want to do any real work, so they listen to whatever their friends from ex-Pentagon or their friend from, oh yeah, I got John here from the Council on Foreign Relations. He's going to tell us all about this. Oh, right. Yeah, so you're basically a mouthpiece for these people.
Right.
They're like, news media is not intentionally manipulating you. They are just lazy. Right. That's it, okay? Yeah. They're just lazy. That's why I think alt media is more important nowadays.
Well, I want to talk a little bit about your current work, which is running the organization called STG Sound Labs, where you make a bunch of really interesting modules.
Thank you.
Now, you first came on my radar because you had a really interesting wave folder, and I've always been a little obsessed with different kinds of waveform manipulators. But when I started looking into it and I started talking to other people, what most people really got obsessed about were two different systems. One is the Mankato filter, and the other is what I can only call a deconstructed sequencer, which is your combination of modules that become a sequencer, right? And I would
modular sequencing network.
Modular sequencing network, sure, that's what we'll call it. I'd like to talk about those two things in specific because they really capture people's imagination in an interesting way. Let's talk about the filter first. First of all, where does the Mankato filter come from? And in your case, you have a very specific layout, at least in the 5U version. I don't know what the Euro version looks like. But the 5U version has like this circular entity to it that's just really unique. It kind of like deals, or looks like at least, like it deals with the phase relationships of different outputs of a filter. Can you talk a little bit about what the Mankato is and where it came from?
Yeah, I'd love to. The Mankato filter was originally designed by Thomas Henry and he lives in Mankato, Minnesota, which is why it's called the Mankato filter. And what Thomas Henry did was he took, if you're familiar with the design or theory of a voltage-controlled low-pass filter, say like the classic Bob Moog 4-pole low-pass filter, it is 4 RC networks in series, okay, where the resistors are replaced with voltage control gain element. In Bob's case, they were transistor pairs. And what Thomas Henry did, it is so genius, is that he replaced those transistor pairs with logarithmic gain cells of a quad VCA chip. Okay, it was made by Analog Devices called the SSM 2164.
Right.
So there's 4, and this is a VCA designed for audio applications. So they're logarithmic VCAs. They're not linear. So they have an exponential response to control current. The reason that this is so clever is that one of the hard things in any voltage controlled circuit that has a pitched element is that pitch has an exponential relationship to frequency. Electronics are linear, okay, but our ears are exponential. Right. That's one way to look at it. There's depending on how you want to stand, you could put it any way you want, but things like amplitude, perceived amplitude, perceived pitch or whatnot, these things are all exponential in nature. Our ears are exponential. Right. So one of the tricky things with any pitched device that is analog in nature is that at some point you have to convert a linear control signal to an exponential current to either charge an oscillator or to control the FC of a filter, okay? Okay. So what Thomas Henry did that is so brilliant by using this chip is that he integrated this exponential converter into the filter ladder itself because these gain cells have a logarithmic response. Right. And they're all close together. The thing is extremely stable, has an extremely stable control response, okay? Very consistent across the spectrum. That's what's special about the Mankato. Now, then Tim Parkhurst took this 4-pole filter, and then he's like, hey, wouldn't it be neat if we also had like 4 more outputs? We'll just invert all the outputs, okay? And then you have the positive and negative of all 4 filter poles, okay? And then you can add them to make different shapes. You could use them in quadrature applications, okay? Right. And so you have this nice palette of different timbres and phases of the resultant resonance. Yeah.
So when you said it was like a 4-channel VCA, I'm like, so how do you get 8 outputs? But I see you just invert the result, yes. And now you have really sort of like a palette of quadrature related outputs to play with. You could do some interesting design with it, I'll bet.
I laid out that panel in 2006 or 2007. And which I guess is 10 years ago now, because I was Tim Parkhurst and John Mahoney at the time had a website called Magic Smoke Electronics, and they were selling these boards, and they also sold like Thomas Henry books and whatnot. They were kind of like a retail outlet for Thomas Henry related things.
Oh, sure, okay.
John said, hey, it would be neat to have a layout for the Mankato, so I did the Moog format layout. And I laid it. I'm not real fond of the circle in electronics. I think that I don't think that it's relevant to the design of a sequencer because there's a lot of people that like, oh, it would be really neat if I put all these knobs in a circle. I know. And I think that's dumb. That's not the way things work. Right. I don't look at a piece of music, of sheet music, and everything's written in a circle.
And want to turn it around.
It goes from one side to the other. There's a reason it goes from one side to the other. We think about musical lines as they're musical lines, not musical circles. Right. So, but in this scenario, it's actually extremely appropriate to put these things in a circle so that you can understand their phase relationship.
The phase relationship, right. Yeah, absolutely. It's pretty brilliant. Well, the other thing that's cool about it, and again, kind of in an iconography sort of way, you can see one of those things from like across a stadium, right? it really jumps out. Yes. And so it's, there's a value in that too. I always think back to recording equipment back in my days in the recording studio. You could always see a Focusrite mic pre from like across the studio because it was the only thing that had a red panel, right?
Or an Eventide H3000 is like that too.
Right. Yep. Yeah. And so these things kind of jumped off the rack, and it ended up being, they were good pieces of gear, but it also helped that they were really unique looking, and so you'd be able to see one coming, right? Now let's talk about this sequencing system because this is fascinating to me. I'd never, before I saw you do this, I'd never really imagined deconstructing the concept of a sequencer this far. but it seems pretty brilliant.
Thanks. It starts from a couple of places. The first and most important is that in 2001, I was having a phone conversation with a friend of mine that I had been friends with since 1997, and we played music together. We were looking for, it was improvisational music, and we wanted sequencing that we could interact with. We started to look at hardware. He called me up one night and he said, "Hey, is there any way to control the length of one analog sequencer from another analog sequencer?" And I said, "No, there isn't," because at that point there was not. Right. I'm not even sure if there is now. So he said, "Well, then I'm going to write my own sequencer then." And this man's name is Jim Coker. And
oh, my goodness.
Over the next 3 years, we developed Numerology, where Numerology is a modular sequencing environment and audio unit host for the Macintosh. And everything that I wanted to see in a sequencer was implemented into Numerology. And for 3 or 4 years, I played every electronic show that I played. I used the freshest alpha, the freshest build of Numerology at, and it never failed me.
You were the torture tester.
Yes, yeah, and Jim is an extremely talented programmer and systems architect, and he is one of my best friends, and I am very proud to have been involved in Numerology, to have birthed it with him, and he's doing a great job with it. I don't use it anymore because I don't use a computer for composing anymore.
Really?
I use hardware for composing, so... Right. But it just came a point with me and Numerology where I had to do something else because it was really just enough for... There's only room for one person on that boat that's pulling the Numerology barge, and I needed to do my own thing. So.
Sure.
So now that you know I was involved in Numerology, you can see why I have a modular hardware sequencing environment.
I do, and why it looks the way it does. Right, exactly. I had no idea. So I've been a Numerology fan from the get-go. I've loved that thing, and what you have sort of looks like a physical manifestation of it.
Yeah, that's the idea, is that that's where, using Numerology allowed me to separate the concepts of pitch and time and timbre and deal with them independently, and gave me a long period to work with those ideas and develop them. Naturally, I work with analog sequencers like this. And one of the things that I find extremely disappointing about electronic musicians in general, and especially in the boutique modular community, because they should know better. No, people are going to think I'm being really critical here, but I don't have a choice, is that people think too much. They can think about patching up a sound, but patching up the sequence that makes the sound, they don't have as much imagination with. They tend to think of everything that they've learned about signals and controls and whatnot. It goes out the window as soon as they start thinking about notes. People who should know better asking, why isn't there a rest on that voltage sequencer? Well, define a rest. What are you talking about? Right. You can't have a rest on a voltage sequencer. It's always putting a voltage out.
It's always sending a voltage, right.
In a trigger sequencer, it is either putting a trigger out or it is not putting a trigger out. There's only two states. The way that I use my sequencers most of the time is I actually use the trigger sequencer to drive the voltage sequencer and fire the envelope generators off. Okay. Because I can interact. It allows me to easier interact with the notes that are going on and in a more dynamic fashion than when you're just looking at notes on a grid, basically. When you're thinking about notes on a grid, you have to break free of that, and you have to start thinking about pitch patterns and rhythm patterns and how they can interact and where you want them to restart and whatnot. And you get more interesting results that way.
Well, that's actually a really interesting point, because if you think about it, that ends up almost being raga-like or something where you're involved in the development of a phrase rather than the development of a series of notes, right? And so doing Correct. That kind of thing gives you if you're driving the pitch sequence from a trigger sequence, now all of a sudden this idea of it's always sending a voltage is tightly integrated to the rhythmic phrase that you create. And the whole thing kind of unifies in a really cool way.
Yeah, and it also, when you start thinking about pitch and time and timbre independently, it changes the way you look at a lot of other things in music. Mm-hmm. I can't really describe it. Sometimes you want things to happen exactly when you want them to happen.
Right.
And sometimes you want to think about having a series of things happen and then deciding later on when you want them to happen. Okay. I can't describe it. But another person that like has very successfully like separated these concepts is my friend Cory Flanagan. He's a drummer and he plays synthesizers and drums at the same time. He uses alternate mode cat controllers like the trap cat and the drum cat, and he uses them with synthesizers. But all the drums that you hear are acoustic. He plays the acoustic drums along with, he has some sequenced elements, but he works a lot with the cat stuff. You can set up a chain of notes on a pad. Uh-huh. So you can have a pattern of notes and then like hit the pad to step through the notes that are stored in the pad.
Sure, right.
And then there's a pad to reset things. And he has developed, over the past 5 years, a musical voice entirely based on this concept. And he'll have like multiple chains set up on different pads and then play a pattern on those pads to generate his melodies. Oh. Like it's very, very, like he's working with concepts that like, this is ridiculous stuff. And I keep on trying to get him to do some YouTube videos where he plays one of his songs and then goes over all the techniques he used to make the song. Because like, you know, I understand not wanting to, he's worked really hard to develop these techniques and I think that they are special. Okay. They are very special. Right. But he's been doing this for 5 years. There's no one that's going to like, I mean, you got to run really fast to catch up with that guy. Like, yeah. I don't know how to put it to you, man, but like, I told him, I said, like, you don't.
Yeah.
So the other thing that was kind of that inspired me to think about hardware sequencing as a network instead of like a monolithic fashion. I call them monolithic sequencers. Mm-hmm. Those big sequencers that are integrated and supposed to do everything, like anything that has a voltage row where there's like a trigger control and voltage on every stage or something like that. One of the things that made me want to go in a more modular fashion was I saw a guy named Dave Bradley, who he lives in Iowa. He and Larry Hendry are the two guys that made the MOTM format viable by doing all of the infrastructure work and panels for DIY modules that Paul couldn't do. Paul could barely supply people with his own modules, because there was so much demand for them. Right. But everyone was loading them into cabinets that had rails that Larry Hendry made. Larry died a few years ago.
He's the guy that came up with the stooge thing, right?
The stooge bracket is called the stooge bracket because, and there was a Larry and Dave, and there was another guy, I can't remember who was the third stooge, but like they just called themselves the Three Stooges.
The Three Stooges, okay.
And so Dave, his website is hotrodmotm.com, I think. And he had this concept on his site of a modular sequencer that was even more deconstructed than mine, as in like his voltage controller idea, it couldn't even step on its own. His idea was to have a stepped voltage generator that would address a voltage controlled stage selector on the voltage sequencer.
Right, okay, sure.
Which is a little bit beyond, that's not really what I want to. Right. Yeah. But his idea was that the sequencer should be as modular as the synthesizer was. Sure. So I just wanted to also give a shout out to him too. He probably won't ever hear this, but he might. He's a great guy. He's also a fellow Hammond player. So I think the most important aspect of our sequencing network is that to drive everything we use what most people call DIN sync, which is the sync between, say, a Roland 808 and a 303. Okay, we took DIN sync, which is more appropriately called Sync 24, and turned it into a little connector, a little 3-pin connector, and we have a DIN sync inlet into the system, and there's a distribution card, and this distributes sync to everything that is tempo driven that I make.
Okay.
And we have the voltage sequencer, we have a trigger sequencer, we have a clock divider called the time divider, which listens to the Sync 24 stream and gives you musically useful clock divisions. Mm-hmm. You can change it from trigger mode to gate mode. You can rhythmically invert those divisions if you want.
Okay.
Our voltage-controlled switch which is not out yet, but should be this year. The voltage-controlled switch has this bonus feature, which is that it also hooks into the sync bus, and the 4 inputs to the voltage-controlled switch are normalized to a CPU listening to the Sync 24 bus, and it is spitting out clocks at 8th notes, 16th notes, 16th triplets, and 32nd notes. So you can do Tangerine Dream style ratcheting with this thing.
Right.
Yeah, by the way, I coined that word. So everyone using the term ratchet to describe that owes me a royalty. But so the first, and that's why gate divide on numerology exists, is that was our way of implementing that idea.
Sure.
In numerology. And gate divide in numerology, it can go up into the audio rate, actually, because everything in numerology is audio rate. But no, in all you really need to sound, if you want to do the Tangerine Dream style ratchet rhythms, you need to have those 4 values. You need to have 8th, 16th, 16th triplets, and 32nd notes. So you take an 8th note voltage sequence and you pump it into the voltage select input on my switch module, as long as it's hooked into the sync bus, and it'll spit out that stream of notes. And then if your voltage is all the way down, then there's no rhythm spit out. If your voltage is 5 volts, then it's 32nd notes. If your voltage is 4 volts, it's between 4 and 5 volts, it's 32nd notes. Between 3 and 4 volts, it's 16th triplets. If it's between 2 and 3 volts, it's 16th notes. And if it's between 1 and 2 volts, it's 8th notes. Now, also, we have these envelope generators that we're working on that should also be out this year that connect to the sync bus. And this is so you can have tempo synchronized envelope stages. So if you want the decay to be exactly 1/8 note, you can do it with this stuff, So it's not just the sequencing network that benefits from the sync bus.
Right.
And eventually we'll have other sequencers as well. I'm itching like mad to discontinue that trigger sequencer. I hate building it because of all the switches that are on it. It's such a pain in the ass.
Right.
I want to do something else. I don't want to go into detail about what I'm going to do. Yeah, there's other. I'd actually like to do a module that'll interface with the Archangel sync bus too, because we have this add-on for the Archangel called the Huffer.
I wanted to ask you about the Archangel because I'm not clear on what interaction you have with that thing.
Okay, basically, the design process for the Archangel was very, very similar to the design process for all the STG Sound Labs stuff, which is that I work with an engineer. His name is Joe Grisso. He is one of the smartest people I've ever met in my life. We needed to develop a product for him to sell.
Okay.
I was like, we need a TKB for the rest of us.
Right.
And that's basically the design process of the Archangel is a TKB for the rest of us, or a TKB for the 21st century.
Good choice. That's a cool perspective. Now, I took a quick look here at Analog Haven, and I see that you have pretty much equivalents of this whole deconstructed sequencing system in both Euro and 5U. Are these like identical boards just behind different faces, or do you have to redesign them to work?
we do a lot of we leverage the hell out of this shit, man.
Okay.
We leverage the hell out of it. So there is one main board that drives all 4 sequencers in Moog and Eurorack format.
Okay.
And it's important to say Moog format instead of 5U because 5U does not necessarily mean Moog format.
Right. Sure.
I'm done building an MOTM format.
Okay.
So if someone else wants to, I had to focus. I had to roll back in like 2009 or so, and say like I'm going to focus on Eurorack and Moog format, and that's it.
All right.
So I don't build in Frac Rack anymore either.
Got it.
But so there's one main board that drives the sequencers in both formats. Okay. If you see, there's also we also have a board that it's got a CPU and some buffers on it, and depending on what software you load in it, it's the time divider, or it's a regular old clock divider. It depends on like how the board is used,
right.
So like the board actually has footprints for jacks on it, and if you load jacks onto it, it's a little 4 HP divider module for Eurorack, but there's also a header on it, or a footprint for a header on it, and so you can clamp it to a front panel, and it can be something else.
Right.
The .com, which is a comparator and suboctave generator in Eurorack format, is also the pulse matrix in Moog format. That's the same. It's the same board on the inside, but in the pulse matrix has a front panel PCB, and it gets a attenuator for the threshold input. Okay. So yeah, there's like. And with the envelope generator as well, there's one main board, and we have actually 4 envelope generators planned out of it.
Okay.
So
interesting. So I don't want to get into the which is better thing because I use both Moog format and Euro because of space constraint. Right now, I'm focused primarily on Euro, but I still own many Moog format modules, and I love them. From your perspective, you kind of wear many hats. You're a live performer, and I want to talk a little more about that in a second. But you're a manufacturer as well. When you're making decisions about for your performance? Let's talk about your performance. When you're making decisions, how do you decide which systems you're going to use? Because obviously you make them both. You probably use them both too, right?
No, I actually have never used Eurorack Live until this Valentine's Day. I
really?
Played a I played
Is that
a gig where
chili gig that I listened to?
Yeah. The 6th annual chili cook-off or synth chili cook-off. Yeah.
Well, that was when you mentioned that you used your Eurorack demo unit there, and I think that was the first time I'd ever seen you in a picture actually using a Eurorack system live. Really,
I have one.
Or the
I have one other photo of me playing live with the Eurorack system, and the gig was not recorded, so it doesn't exist, which is sad. But I played at there's a brewery in Abingdon, Virginia, called Wolf Hills, Wolf Hills Brewery. Anyway, and I played there in July of 2014. I played the first gig in public with a Moog Sub 37. I was very happy about this.
Nice.
And I had just spent a week in Asheville, doing beta testing and patch programming for Moog, and then drove up to see my friend Watson in Bristol. And Abingdon is just up the road from Bristol, and I had booked a gig there. And I used the Sub 37, and I used my Eurorack demo system at the time. And I had built this keyboard rig that was supposed to be able to fit in my trunk that was based around like an MMT8 and a Moog Minitar and a Korg Micro Station and a Novation Ultra or a Mini Nova and a couple of other things. And I enjoyed playing the gig. It was really unusual for the people that were there. They didn't really know what to make of it. The bartenders liked it. No one really complained. There was a couple people that got a little cranky, but I like to have a little friction at gigs.
Sure.
You need to set out to make music that's enjoyable to listen to. And I don't think that you don't need to pander to a crowd, but you need to make music that a reasonable person will enjoy. If you can do something that also irritates unreasonable people at the same time, that's a good goal. I'm not going to say like I want to outright antagonize a crowd, but I would like, there is an adversarial element to the music that I do because it is a little, for some people, challenging. And
right.
This is the same way that I approached gigging with a soul band. Mm-hmm. You know, like I had this band where I played Hammond organ and there was a guitar player and a drummer. And we would play some jazz and some soul tunes and some pop tunes. But it was the combination of the material. You know, you play like, Nelson Riddle, Stolen Moments?
Yeah.
It's a great tune. Anyway, so you play Stolen Moments, followed up by an Isaac Hayes cover, and then an Everything But the Girl cover.
Uh-huh.
And you're an organ trio.
Right.
Like, there are some people, it wasn't difficult to listen to. We weren't making difficult music.
Right.
But the music that we were playing basically represented what I'm into, which is a wide variety of things.
Sure.
You know, I would listen to Isaac Hayes and then Nelson Riddle and then Everything But the Girl.
Uh-huh.
But you know, a lot of people that really like your blues jam might not like it when you sing a Pet Shop Boys tune, even though for you it's all very meaningful to you.
Right.
You
It's
know?
a natural fit.
So,
well, it's interesting because what you're saying is that you want the crowd to have a relatively large intersection point between a lot of different kinds of musics, or at least be able to enjoy them.
Yes. Yeah. And the people that get irritated when they see that intersection, I relish antagonizing them.
Well, that's awesome.
Like it, you know, or another way to put it is if you don't got haters, you ain't shit.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And and I've always tried to live my life like that. So, that's cool. I was a little bit more rambunctious, say 10 years ago than I am now, but it's still there. And so like I took the Eurorack system out on Valentine's Day because I was only going to play for 30 minutes. And I'd been playing a lot of piano, playing like I'm an organist that just picked up piano like a year and a half ago or so when someone gave me a CP70.
Right.
And so I'd been developing my piano voice, you know, and like through music that I was already that I was already familiar with and in love with. Like I have an arrangement of the Doctor Who theme, you know, like the Force melody from Star Wars, stuff from Blade Runner, you know, and these are songs that I play when most people don't know this, and anybody who knows me knows this, but about once a week, I go to Jim's Steakhouse here in Peoria and sit at the piano bar. I have a steak dinner, and I sit at the piano bar and drink old fashions and hang out with the married couple that plays there, Ed and Judy Howard, who are the KnobCon banquet band. So that's where those people, if you ever wonder, like, where did they get this band for the banquet at KnobCon? It's like, well, these people are who I see when I go to dinner once a week at Jim's. Right. You know, and I sit in, play some piano with Ed, you know, and Ed trying to play guitar over, you know, the Blade Runner, my weird arrangement of the Blade Runner and titles. And he's like, you know, and it's like, what? So I'd been working on this stuff with the piano, but it's like, first of all, like I'm supposed to play synthesizers at this thing. I don't want to be a total dick and just bring a piano.
Right.
And I need some other textures, you know. And I added the Juno 6 on top, and I had just got the TC Electronic Ditto X4, or Behringer Ditto X4, as I'd like to call it, because Behringer now owns TC, so keep that in mind.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah. They bought TC, and there's all sorts of crazy industry drama if you really want to talk about it. But I'd rather talk about something else. I loaded up a little 6-space rack with the BSS. The rare is hen's teeth, apparently, BSS mic pre that I run my CP70 through because I don't like Yamaha's electronics. I run it through a nice clean mic pre.
Sure.
That and like the Eventide 3000 and like a little reverb or whatever. And then I needed something for bass plucks. Okay. I'm like, well, I could bring the Mini Moog, but I could also just bring my Eurorack system and use this 2-octave keyboard controller.
Right.
So that's what I did. And so I used it like that. And, I didn't do anything. I basically just made a sound. I just made a bass pluck sound. I don't know if you've listened to the Blade Runner soundtrack a lot, but I played like Blade Runner Blues and the Prologue and Rachel's Song and Titles. And those are the 4 tunes that I played, and my arrangement of them. And like one of the things I really like about I've been, for years I've been like playing around, like kind of flirting with Vangelis's techniques. You need to have synthesizers that sustain. You need to have synthesizers that pluck and sustain. You need to have a piano, and you need to have something that does bass plucks. So I had between a combination of like the sustain button on the Juno and looping, I had that was that element. So the Juno 6 went through the Ditto X4 for looping, and then through the Eventide H3000. I basically use my textural looping is basically I'm copycatting like 90s Robert Fripp, basically.
Right.
I'm
there
it's
with
really,
you. I did
really
the same thing, yeah.
And I use the two things that I need is I need a sawtooth wave with a filter cutoff, I need a looper, and I need an Eventide. So you give me those 3 things, and I can sound close to Robert Fripp all night long if you want.
Sure.
If you're talking about like Radiophonics, Blessing of Tears, 1999, like that period.
Right.
But so that gave me that element, and then I played the piano, and then for the bass plucks I used the and the piano was going through a Korg SDD 3000 pedal and a Lexicon Alex reverb. I love the mid '90s Lexicon stuff. It's fantastic. It's still hard. You cannot get a better reverb for $80 than a Lexicon Alex.
Right.
Especially when you open it up and change the gain stage so that like it doesn't hiss like a motherfucker.
Oh yeah. Well, one of the things that I recognize, because I've long loved playing with reverb and drenching everything in reverb. It's a particular love of mine. And there was a change in the Lexicon reverb sound that happened in the 2000s as a result of something. I don't know exactly what, changing tastes or changing algorithms or something. But all of a sudden...
I can tell you exactly what happened.
Oh, please do.
Lexicon was acquired by Harman International in the mid-90s.
Okay.
2 things. A lot of the sound, like the Lexicon had application-specific integrated circuits. Okay, called the LexA Chip.
Okay.
They basically they'd been working for 15 years. They worked on taking the big stuff like the 240 or whatever,
right,
and then condensing it into smaller and smaller electronics until they arrived at the LexA Chip and the LexA Chip 2, which are what the the MPX 100, the MPX 1. The Alex,
right?
They have the LexA Chip in them, and what the LexA Chip is it's a processor designed totally to do the mass modulated delay cluster that is the Lexicon reverb.
Okay,
it's totally optimized for this. And when they stopped using the LexA Chip and they started using commodity DSPs, it lost a lot of that character. Okay,
I see.
it's like why the Eventide will never make anything that sounds like a 3000 until they make me a product developer for them. Okay, because they will not do what needs to be done to model what the 3000 can. They don't understand that the 3000 is what people associate with Eventide sound. I won't use any new Eventide stuff. It all sounds terrible. Like, it's so clean, and like, I mean, I'm sure it sounds great for if you want the sound of an Orville, that's great. I don't want that sound. I want the 3000. The 3000 is what's on all the pop records and the like all the crazy electronic records that make you want an Eventide.
Right.
Used a 3000.
Right.
They didn't use a DSP series. So like the more the like advanced and I hope someone from Eventide is listening so their blood can boil when they hear me complain about it. The reason that the 3000 sounds the way it does is because of the programming and also the fact that it has this weird architecture that's created by like the kind of DSPs that they had used at the time. They had to use three DSPs in the 3000.
Oh, interesting.
And they're very primitive DSPs. They're not Motorola 56K based, okay? You would have to have the corporate backing of a company like Eventide to even attempt to copy what is in the 3000. You have to have access to the IP. You also have to have a really well-hung electrical engineer. It is possible to copy what's in the Eventide 3000, but you're not going to do it with a 56K chip. That's for sure.
Now, one thing I was going to ask you about in regards to this is if you found any like software things that work for you, but it sounds like you don't really mess around with software and synthesis at all, or software and recording.
No, I don't. No. I use software for compositing. I'll tell you what plugins I use. I use whatever comes with Digital Performer. Okay.
Oh, okay. All right.
I don't use any third-party plugins. None.
Interesting. Well, you picked a good one to hang your hat on, because the plugin development work that they do at MOTU is pretty outrageous. They've made some amazing sounding stuff.
Oh yeah, and also I have I've got a drum and bass track that I haven't released yet. I did a few years ago actually. I'm waiting to get around to doing another drum and bass track so I can do like a 12-inch of that.
Oh, right. Sure.
I basically I did a deep house 12-inch a couple years ago. It was a remix of a Dorian Electra song called Fast Cash, which is about the dangers of low interest rates. It came together pretty quickly because I had enough material that like fit together to just make it happen. But I have like half completed dance 12 inches like lying around that I need to finish.
Right.
So I'm definitely most interested in doing more dance 12 inches, even though it's a completely pop 12 inches are one thing, but like DJs don't use records anymore.
Right.
So, like the only way that you can go more archaic than doing vinyl is to do dance vinyl.
Right. Well, you can always pull out the 8-track recorder if you need to, but yeah, that is a bit of obscurity at this point.
So when I made this drum and bass track, which basically sounds like a early '90s LTJ Bookham thing. That was kind of what I was going for.
Oh, sure.
I took a drum part from this band that I had recorded, this blues band from Springfield that I had recorded in my studio. The track was called Loving Ways, whatever. Anyway, great, really, really neat band. It was called, the band was named Black Magic Johnson. Anyway. Okay. Really, really, really cool band. And I took this 2-bar drum loop or 2-bar drum intro, and then I pitched it up. I basically like chopped it into 1/8 notes and loaded it into the drum sampler in Performer. Mm-hmm. And it did everything I needed a sampler to do.
Yeah, sure.
If you can't do break beats with the sampler that comes with Digital Performer, then you're not trying.
Right.
I don't get it. Like, it sounds great. Like,
yeah.
It's fine. You don't need Contact. Just use that. Don't complicate your life.
Well, I think a lot of it is getting the right source material too. I mean, that you had,
Oh yeah.
obviously you'd identified in your head that here was a groove and a drum sound and a drum track that was going to make good source material, and I think that goes a long way towards getting a decent breakbeat too.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. But, I'm just saying, like, if you do have the right drum loop, if you do have the right source material, like, if you want to do chopped up drums, like, I think it's called Model 12 or something like that is the, is the drum sequencer, the drum sampler plugin. Like, it's fine. It's fine. Sometimes I use the convolving reverb in Performer, but usually, actually, I will say, the two third-party plugins that I use the most are the Eventide H3000 and the Lexicon PCM80. I just like run audio out to them and then run it back in.
Yeah, that's smart.
I also do my only outboard compressor is a Denon tape recorder.
Oh, really?
Because you can monitor off of there's a separate monitor head, so you can actually like record to it and then monitor in real time what is being put to tape, so you can use it as a short tape delay,
right,
and then saturate the hell out of it. And you can actually
That's cool.
one of the problems with doing that with most tape decks is that the analog input section of most tape decks, the analog section, both input and output, cannot handle the hot levels that you get when you're actually saturating cassette tape. Okay, so you need to have a really high quality deck to be able to do this.
Right.
And that's why I use that Denon for that.
Sure.
And it's the drums on that drum and bass track. I did that drum loop. The drum take went through the tape deck and back in. The other plugin that I use is the other side of my building. I have a mic over there, and basically, like when I'm tracking drums or whatever, I record waist level side mics on the drums using large diaphragm dynamics or large diaphragm condensers. Like I think AKG C3000s.
Right. Okay.
I've got a bass drum mic. Can't remember which one it is. It's and then a Beta 57 on the underside of the snare, and then I got another Beta 57 in the next room, and it just listens to that room, and I record that on a 5th track, and it's the best drum sound I've ever heard. So
that's awesome. Yeah, it's funny if you look at the history of some of the great recording studios. So often there's a story like that. Like, we set up a mic in this one spot, and it was like the magic thing that actually made this room great, Cool.
Well, I don't think it's there. I don't think there's a I'm not going to try to claim that I have a magic spot for the mic. I'm just getting the sound of the drums reverberating. Like the drums are moving from my room and then bouncing into the room next door. And then bouncing around that room. I don't think it would matter where I pointed that mic.
Right. It just would end up good in there, right?
Yeah. Everybody's favorite, like everyone says, like, I want it to sound like John Bonham or whatever. It's like I have a basement. It's like 8 feet, like my basement is 7 feet tall and the room's about 10 by 13. How do I sound like John Bonham? I'm like, You're never going to sound like John Bonham in that room.
Yeah.
Like when the levee, like the drums on When the Levee Breaks, they recorded those drums in the foyer of this like 4-story mansion. They put a couple drums on the drum kit, but then they put another mic like 4 stories up and pointed it at the ceiling, or something. It was something like that. It's like it's the room. The room sounded like that. I love electronic reverb. I mean, I don't just like electronic reverb. I love it. But I love it on electronic instruments.
Yeah, one of the things I would say is that you're actually really particular about your equipment choices, and unlike a lot of people that I have interacted with, you don't seem to have. There's not a like time-based Catholicism exactly to it, right? Because you do use use some modern stuff, and you use some stuff that's related to the music you love, but you're also like really informed, and you're using techniques and concepts from ages ago. Then when I look at pictures of your gear, I mean, from the Chili gig, I saw that picture of you at the Chili cook-off thing, and my first thought was, hey, dude, how's your back doing? Because you have like, except for a Hammond organ, which apparently you didn't bring that night, you have every backbreaker in the business practically. Oh, you don't have a Rhodes with you, but you have a CP70, which is just a killer to haul around. You got a big old Juno 6, you got a rack of outboard gear, you got a modular synth, and but you are obviously making some very thoughtful choices. And I'm curious to hear from you, what is it that makes things work for you? What is it about a CP70, or what is it about a Hammond, or why the Juno 6 versus the 60 versus the 106? There are choices to be made here. How do you make those choices? What are the things that speak to you?
This is a very, very, very good question. So let me start by saying that my normal keyboard rig is carried in a trailer. And what I took to the empty bottle was a light rig. Okay.
Oh, Jesus.
So my normal keyboard rig goes in a trailer. There is a 5.5 foot tall rack. There is a road case for the 60 Moog unit modular system. I have a drum machine case called the Hot Mix 5 that has a Korg ESX 909, 808, a Juno 60, and a Zox box in it. And that case goes on a custom cart. It can only be moved on that cart. And the case is 30 inches wide and it's 60 inches long. And then another case goes on top of that has had my Mini Moog, now my Sub 37, and the Blofeld in it. And then there's also a Korg Kronos, and a Kronos gets carried. I'm still working on the case for that station. I'm trying to work everything into so that it fits into a certain number of the Hot Mix 5 is its own case. Mm-hmm. The keyboard station that has like the Sub 37, the Blofeld, that's its own case. Haven't quite got the case together for the central station with the Korg Kronos and the King Korg, which also has the Korg pad control to control 2 Oberheim Echoplexes in the main rack, and a Boss RC505 looper, which is what the King Korg goes through. The Echoplex is for looping the Kronos. Mm-hmm. And then also next to the RC505 is a 2-octave MIDI keyboard controller to transpose the modular. Now, that is one of 2 2-octave keyboard controllers that are in my live rig to transpose the modular. The other one is underneath the modular. The reason that I have 2 keyboard controllers for this, they get merged in a MOTU MIDI timepiece, and then spit back out into the MIDI to CV module on the synthesizer, is that if I'm soloing on the Sub 37 or something, if I'm pointed in the direction of the keyboards at the front of my rig, I want to be able to transpose the modular there as well as when I'm facing the modular.
Right.
So when I'm facing the modular, I can transpose the sequences. I can transpose the modular with that little keyboard, but I also am changing chords on the Juno 60, which is almost always being used for some sort of rhythmic arpeggiator thing that is being. I'm not using the Juno to play chords in my live rig. The main rig, the as Chris Pearson calls it, the hover tank. The Juno that I brought to the empty bottle was a Juno 6 instead of a Juno 60, because the 60 is in the other rig. Okay. They both sound the same. I actually prefer the sound of the Juno 6, but my Juno 6 needs a little bit of work. I actually have 3 Junos. I have a Juno 6 that I got in 1995 from one of the 2 guys that named me Suit and Tie Guy, I should add.
Okay.
That Juno 6 is actually signed by Bela Fleck and the Flecktones. And because I was really into Bela Fleck in the mid-90s.
Okay.
And so yeah, I had that, and then that thing is just so worn out, like it needs to be completely I don't know if it'll ever get rebuilt. But I got a Juno 60 from Angelo Metz, traded him some trigger sequencers. He gave me a Juno 60, and then Juno 6 came up for sale in Chicago so cheap that I had to buy it immediately. So that's why I have 3 Junos. The Juno is like my favorite keyboard, basically, because like it always sounds good, and it just always sounds good. You know, you just set the knobs to whatever, it'll sound good. I promise. So that, like, to answer your question, like why the Juno 60 over the Juno 6 or whatever? Well, I don't really care between those two. It's not that important. I definitely prefer either to the 106. Reason number 1 is the arpeggiator. The arpeggiator in the Juno 6 is the best arpeggiator ever made until the Sub 37 came along, which has a better arpeggiator because I was involved in that. So,
All right.
And the reason I took the CP70 instead of a digital piano is that I don't own a digital piano. I played 1 gig with the CP70 and I said, I'm never going to do this again. I immediately called up Casio and was like, I want a PX5S. Like dollar for dollar, I think the Casio PX5S is it's what I went for. I've got a Kronos. It's got a great piano sound on it, but I don't like the new Korg. I don't like the Korg weighted keys. They're really, really hard on your hands. Yeah. I don't even like the new Yamaha keybeds. Yeah, the Casio is my favorite keybed right now. So as far as like a weighted keyboard goes, but as like carrying the organ is one thing. It's easy to move an organ around because it's on wheels. You know, you just put wheels on it and wheel it in, take it to the gig. You take the wheels off and put the pedal board on. Bob's your uncle.
That makes a great assumption that you don't have to carry it up many steps.
Yeah, well, then you just don't take gigs that have stairs. I did my last stair gig in 2006, and I said, you know what? Never, ever again am I going to go upstairs, ever. And then you know what happens when you make that decision? You wind up not ever having to play a gig that has stairs involved ever again.
Right.
Don't just take a gig just because someone's offering you a gig. You don't have to, I don't care how much somebody pays me, but I don't want them to make my life hard to play the gig. Okay?
Yeah.
Like I'll drive 6 hours and play a gig in a cornfield for fucking $100. When I have done that. But they treat me really well. They treat me with respect, and they don't ask me to go upstairs. Right. Someone asks you to go upstairs, they're not respecting you. Have some self-respect when you're gigging. So I don't do stair gigs. And I have taken a Hammond organ upstairs. I have done 4 gigs, 3 or 4 gigs, where I took the organ upstairs. So my suggestion is don't ever do that.
Well, clearly you learned something and were able to change your lifestyle to fit. Beyond some of those things, like your choice of effects, or your choice of microphones, or your choices of recording gear and stuff like that. How do you make determinations? Does it generally and okay, I guess I would ask this way. Do you tend see for me if I'm really thoughtful about things, far more has to do with the feel than either the sound or the performance of anything, whether it's software or hardware, a sequencer, a synthesizer, a keybed, or even I'm a guitarist or a guitar or whatever. I can accept a guitar that sounds funny, or it might be green with pictures of Gilligan's Island characters on it. But if it feels right, I'm buying a damn thing, right?
Yeah.
And so
would you play? I want to know. Would you play like a teal green Ibanez Iceman covered with happy face stickers?
Oh, you bet I would if it felt right.
Okay, cool.
Because I've been.
I just a friend of mine has a teal green Iceman covered with yellow happy face stickers.
But I can tell you,
he plays ambient stuff.
I probably actually wouldn't, because the feel of that body, it wouldn't fit right on my body, I don't think. Of course, who knows? Maybe it would. Maybe my body is malformed enough that it would be perfect. I don't know.
Yeah.
But anyway, what are the things that you look for? Because seems like a lot of your stuff is really oriented towards sound.
I would say, like, sometimes I'm really particular, and sometimes I'm not. Okay, it's like I might have mentioned that I used like C3000s,
right,
to mic up a drum kit. Okay, the reason I use C3000s is because that's what I had laying around. Now they're nice C3000s. They're like the Austrian C3000s before AKG started building their stuff in China. Mm-hmm. But they're just like a pair of mics that in the 90s when I was putting on punk rock shows, which is something we didn't talk about, but it's something I did, was like locally. I was the primary punk rock show promoter in Peoria for about a 3-year period. My friend James got into recording the gigs or the shows, okay? So I have this large DAT archive of shows from Peoria punk rock shows from 1996 to 1999, which is
cool.
kind of funny. But he bought everything in pairs. So we had pairs of C1000s, mm-hmm. A pair of C3000s. He got these BSS mic preamps as a pair because Sweetwater was blowing them out because no one wanted them. But this mic preamp cost $1,000 in 1997. 1997 money, $1,000 for a mic preamp was a lot of money.
It's real money.
So but you go looking for information about the what is this, the BSS FCS 916, you'll never find it on the internet. There's like one review of this thing for Mix Magazine in like 1996, and it wasn't even a review. It's like a mention and like a rundown of like what preamps are available this year, and so I don't have these BSS preamps because like there's some sort of magical preamp. They're just what's around. I wound up getting all of his stuff when he liquidated.
I see.
So I got that stuff. The reason that I have the PV520i large diaphragm dynamic for doing podcasts is because in 1996 I put on a show, or 97, no, it was 97. I put on a punk rock show where I was short on mics and I had to go to the music store and like rent a microphone. And they rented me a pair of these things and I thought they were brilliant. And I promptly forgot about them. And then like one day, like last year or 2 years ago, I was like, hey, I could probably afford one of those. I bet I could get a couple of those PV mics now. And lo and behold, I found 4. I found 2 pairs at 2 different new old stock pairs at 2 different times. The first pair I bought for myself, and my friend Caleb came over and fell in love with it, so I bought one for him. And then there's a podcaster that I really like that I wanted to help him out. He had a really shitty mic, so I bought one as a gift for him too, and he still uses it. So like that choice was kind of that was accidental, okay? Uh-huh. Other things I'm very particular about, loopers, okay? Right. There's the best looper ever made is the Oberheim Echoplex, period. And there's no getting around it. I use the Boss RC505 because it's the second best looper, okay? And then third best looper is the Behringer Ditto X4, mm-hmm. which they finally made. Behringer has finally made or TC Electronic or whatever you want to call them now has finally made a looper that has a feedback control on it. Mm. Well, this thing, the Ditto X4, does things that up until now could only be done with an Oberheim Echoplex, which is going from record. Some things have done record into overdub. Record into overdub is very important. Mm-hmm. But what if you want to go from record immediately into reverse?
Right.
Well, the Ditto X4 can do that. This is the only looper other than the Oberheim Echoplex that can go from record into reverse or from record into half speed. It can pull a trick off that even the Echoplex can't. It can go from record into reverse and overdub at the same time, or half speed and overdub at the same time. So yes, like that thing right there, it's very particular. My music instruments or reverbs effects are very particular. Like Like I really like Lexicon reverbs. I like Eventide Alien Landscape, reverb. But I don't fetishize things just because they're old. I have an 808 and a 909, and they've been in my live rig. I've been using them live for 6 years now. Okay, I've been using a 909 for 13 years. I love it. It's my favorite drum machine. But you know what? I just got 2 TR8s. And the TR-808 and the 909 are going to leave the Hot Mix 5, and they are now going to stay in the studio, and I'm going to use a pair of TR-8s.
Wow.
The TR-8 sounds that good, okay? It sounds that good, and it is that easy to use. And, you set one TR-8 up with 808 sounds, the other one with 909 sounds. So, and I think it'll improve my music because it's easier to interact with than the old stuff. So, no, I'm not a historical fetishist. I just want the best things.
Right. Now,
I took the Mini Moog out of my rig and I use a Sub 37 instead of the Mini Moog now.
Well, one of the things I'm curious about though now, because you mentioned 2 devices that I've used the TR8 some, but I was really into the RC505 for a while. And eventually, one of the things I notice happens to me sometimes is I'll find a thing. It may do 100% of what I want it to do. But if there's something else about it that really irritates me, eventually it's going to worm into my spine until I just I got to get rid of it, And that was the case with the RC505. I loved the way it worked. I'm not normally a big fan of the neon lights on Broadway style of user interface, right? But
yeah. I like the feedback on the 505.
Yeah, I was going to say,
I think it's really informative.
In their case, the way that they do that moving ring, it really lets you know where you're at in the loops and stuff. But the effects that are built into that, I don't know how Boss can put their name on something. Boss is a company that makes effects. How can they put their name on something that has such pitiful effects, right? And it was one of those things where I liked the looper, and I liked the fact that I could do either synchronized or desynchronized loops. Everything about it was right, but those effects, they were there and they could be used, but I'd try using them and they sounded so bad. And finally I was like, I can't even stand having this thing around because of this flaw. It was almost like it almost upset me in a way that I couldn't get over. And you surely run into that because you've got a lot of gear and you've interacted with a lot of gear.
I use things for what they're good at. So I don't use the shitty effects on the 505. I use the good ones. Okay. The good ones are the slicer, and slicer and scatter, and that's it. I love the slicer on that thing. You just load up. I want to get a Boss slicer pedal now because I didn't realize how cool it would. Okay, so one of my big influences is the KLF, and the KLF were the first dance act to incorporate a technique of taking a track or a pad, running through a noise gate, and then keying the noise gate from the hi-hat track. Mm-hmm. The shaman or whatever, they took that technique from the KLF and then built a whole sound out of it.
Right.
But it's a really important part of the KLF sound. And it didn't occur to me how handy it would be to have something like that until I got the 505 and it had the slicer integrated, the slicer integrated into it. So I'm always using that thing live. The other thing that I use is the I can't remember the name of the effect now.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yeah, right.
You turn it on and it
you determine
stutter?
how deep I think it is stutter. You determine how much it's going to. It reminds me a lot of the beat.
It loops
kind of thing.
As soon as you engage the effect, it just starts looping a current whatever's current
Right.
It loops a certain amount of time goes all the way from 1 bar down to 30-second notes, okay?
Right.
And that effect, I use that all the time. I use it in apparently it took me about a year to figure out that it had a reverse mode. So it'll like stutter in reverse. So I'll have a loop going on it, and then like I'll like reverse the track for like just a moment as like a part of a fill, or like leading into a new part coming in or something like that. So I don't know, like I don't use the reverb on it. I don't use the reverb on any of my keyboards because it's all terrible.
It is all
like
terrible.
when you got a Lexicon PCM80 in your rack, you're not worried about why are you going to use the reverb on your Chronos when you've got a Lexicon.
Good point. Sure.
So I use things for what they're good at, and if they have enough for what they're good at to make me happy, then I get excited about them. Like, and also the other thing that's really important to me is how effective a tool is for how much it's worth. There are synthesizers out there that sound better for virtual analog sounds than a King Korg. But the King Korg is only worth $800 if I have to replace it. Mm-hmm. The value of the TR8 versus the value, like, one of the considerations in moving from the 909 and the 808 to a pair of TR8s is that if I I was able to get a pair of TR8s, like, I can't even tell you how much I paid because, like, I got them. I can't tell you how much I paid because I got them from one of my dealers.
Right.
Like, I can replace TR8s very easily.
Right.
If someone steals my 909, it's going to kill me.
Sure.
I'll never be able to replace it. So, like, taking like $6,000 worth of drum machines out of your rig and replacing them with $1,000 worth of drum machines that sound just as good. Yeah, it makes sense. So, like, I have a Korg Kronos, but I don't have like a Kronos 88. I don't even have a new Kronos. I've got the first generation Kronos. Mm-hmm. It's like the Sub 37 sounds fantastic, and it costs less than a mini Moog D. So like if something happens to the Sub 37, I can call up Moog and give them some money, and they'll give me another one. But if I lost my mini Moog D, I can't. How effective something is for how much it costs is an important consideration, not just for replacement aspect, but also for respect. As in, like, when something does a really good job and it's cheap, I like it even more. Like the Ditto X4, this is a stereo 24-bit looper that has feedback control and can go from record into reverse, and it costs $250. And it synchronizes to MIDI. There's nothing better. Like, I can't even, the Echoplex is still the god emperor of loopers, okay? But I can never recommend that somebody buy an Echoplex now that the Ditto X4 is available, even though I hate Behringer with a passion. And it's for professional reasons, by the way, because the Behringer's chip fab fucked up an order and have not fixed it, okay? So, like, the chips in the Mankato, the 2164, I have to buy them from Behringer's chip fab. It's called Cool Audio. They're the only people that still make this chip. The last time I ordered from Cool Audio, they sent me the wrong chips. They wouldn't fix it, and it delayed re-releasing the Mankato for 5 months trying to deal with this. Because I had the investment of the chips that I had to recover from. I'm not rolling in dough over here. Right. So when somebody when somebody rips me off on an order like that, then it makes me angry. Yeah, and I kind of like made a scene at NAMM this year when I was at the Behringer booth and like had to deal with people that didn't even people who work for Behringer that don't even know they have a chip fab. Right. They don't even know Behringer is so big now. People who work for Behringer don't even know how many companies Behringer owns.
Someday I have to do a podcast where I just talk about some of these. Practically everything that we saw at the NAMM show was controlled sort of by a couple of companies. I think a lot of people never really caught that Behringer scooped up Midas, and these things kind of happened, and there's a result to that. There's a result to the industry when only a few players are responsible for making the majority of the gear. And I think that there's, that has the potential for being a dangerous track. Let's say it that way.
Well, that's the importance of the boutique market.
Right.
Is that whereas like that consolidation is going on up there, it's like the boutique is getting more, like my booth was across the aisle from Hammond. I got to be aisle buddies with my friends from Chicago that make organs.
Right.
The Hammond, Hammond, a name that has been around since 1938 to now, okay? 75 years this company has been making organs. And they're still the best Hammond organs, okay? Like what Hammond makes, there's nobody that can touch what Hammond does. Their clone wheel organs are better than everyone else's, period. Hands down, no contest, no argument. We'll arm wrestle all night about this. And to be across the aisle from them, like it was exhilarating for me. Like I turn around and like Dr. Lonnie Smith is like right there. Like, hey Lonnie, come over, like check this thing out. I'm calling it the carpetbagger, and he just like laughs a little bit. And, it's not like I'd already met him a few times. I think the first time I saw him play was like 1999 or 2000 or something. But being able to see, like have this comfort, like it was just amazing. So like, but it's the boutique. And now you see the larger companies, they are taking cues from the boutique market, okay?
Right.
So now the boutique is what is driving things ahead, because what the big guys focused on for so long are romplers and workstations. And then, you had this period where nobody was building new hardware because everyone was all like hardware's dead, we're just gonna use laptops and shitty fucking USB controllers that'll break after 3 gigs. So what that period, that 7-8 year period in electronic music did was destroy the major companies' ability to make mid-range instruments. Mm-hmm. And that presented a market vacuum for people like me to come along and thrive. And I'm totally thankful for it. I'm not going to lie. I foresaw this happening when it was going on, because here I was playing like hardware. I did this show and like I played a show with Richard Devine in 2005 in Atlanta. And like everybody was like laptops,
Yeah.
And here I am, I've got like my hardware, which I'm still controlling from Numerology, but for some reason I said that Numerology never failed me. Well, other things would. And that night, it was the 909. It was the 909's MIDI sync that failed me. Mm-hmm. So I had to use the 909 as a MIDI clock master instead of a clock slave. So I'm playing this gig, and it's like I just shut the laptop after about 5 minutes and built a set that was all hardware. And I'm looking at everybody else, and it's like, you guys are just laptops now. Like, that's cool. You can go on an airplane, I guess. Like, that's cool. I guess if you're into airplanes, I'm not. I drive everywhere. It's like hardware. I knew that like hardware was going to come back.
I have to say, I was lured in by the siren song of the laptop. It was the laptop that was like, oh man, because one of the issues that I had was I had a massive amount of hardware, just on the edge before it was ridiculous to buy old analog stuff. I had the opportunity to buy a bunch of it. I was not great at electronics at the time. I barely knew which end of a soldering iron got hot. And so I would get this old gear, but first of all, a bunch of it I bought off of this total zero in San Francisco named Dave Longo, who would sell everybody broken gear. It was pretty rough sled, right? But secondly...
Yeah, I remember.
Yeah, and secondly, there was just a lot of gear that would break all the time. And so I just felt like after a while I got really tired of this idea that, everything, at any given point in time, 25% of my studio was non-operational, right? And that was another one of those things kind of got under my skin. And so the laptop, a plug-in never breaks hardly. And when it does, you can't do anything but reboot the machine anyway. So it seemed at the time clean, but what I noticed was that the quantity and quality of the music I was making went directly downhill. at that point. There was something about working with hardware that gave me the freedom to do things and record them that obsessing by looking at the laptop never did. And it was something that took me a long time to realize that was the issue at play. And, luckily for me now, a lot of the things I like in hardware, boutique manufacturers, or even some people like Roland and Korg are making things that sort of have the heart and some of the ghosts of some of that old equipment I had, but are in a new form factor and built in a way that it's probably not, I don't have to worry about my studio being half broken all the time.
Yeah, and also, like, I'd point out, like, I think that Korg is going to keep on making Odysseys and MS-20s until, I guess I could see a future where they don't make them, but, like, your mayor's name is Master Blaster, and I'm not really looking forward to that future. Like, I just don't see it as being very likely.
Right.
When we're all driving around in desert rods and dune buggies and wearing bondage gear. Like Korg will probably not be making Odysseys and MS-20s at that point.
But we'll be worried about doing stuff more than 12-inch dance.
You're not going to be worried too much about making hot dance singles like when you got to worry about surviving beyond Thunderdome.
Right.
So it's a nice time. We're in the golden period. I mean, the keyboard market is finally where the guitar market was in the 90s, is the way that I like to put it. Mm-hmm. The guitar market got to where it was in the 90s, and it's pretty much stayed there since then.
Right.
Guitar products have had there has actually been a loss in market share in the guitar market of the overall MI market, mm-hmm. like the percentage that like guitar products have. It has gone down over the past 5 years. But it's not going to go away. No. It's always going to be there. Right. It'll always be very strong. It'll probably always be stronger than keyboards. Right. But this isn't a fad. This is a stabilization. This is a cultural stabilization that we're living through that's being caused by the death of monoculture. Okay? So, like, we're no longer in a period where, like, the record company says dance, and you say, like, how high. Okay? That just doesn't it's no longer the case. You don't go buy the new Cherry Poppin' Daddy's single just because, like, the record company is like paid enough fucking record stations or radio stations to play the tune and convince you that it's the number one hit single in the country right now. Mm-hmm. We choose our own art now. Things have become fractionalized. I see a lot of people on social media whining about it sometimes, but I don't really care. I'll take this any day. Any day I will take the situation we have now over the situation that we had in the 90s.
Right. I totally agree. All right. Well, man, we've burned through a lot of time. I really appreciate you taking time out of your schedule to talk to me. And
I hope people listen.
Oh, I'm sure they will. I still feel like I have still 500,000 questions. I wanted to talk about KnobCon. I wanted to talk more about the Hammond. I wanted to talk more about what your NAMM experience was, but that'll have to wait for another time. But what I like asking, when I see somebody who's got a wide range of gear and stuff like that, I don't like to be too gear focused, but I do like finding out a little bit about favorites. Of all your instruments and all the stuff you work with, what's your favorite thing? The favorite thing that you don't make?
The Hammond and the B3 and a Leslie 31H and a Leslie 122 all running at once.
That still does it for you,
It's the best thing in the world.
Yeah, interesting.
Oh, yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah, I like building synthesizers, but I would be just as happy playing 4 nights a week in a supper club in the south end of Peoria in 1968.
That's awesome. Well, Sue, thank you so much. I hope that everybody will take the opportunity to go out, take a look at the work that you've been doing, both musically as well as with making your gear. And with that, I'm going to say goodbye for you tonight. See you later.
Thank you, Darwin.
All right. Thank you. Bye. Many thanks to Soot for the very interesting and frankly opinionated chat. I always like it when people come to the deck with a reason to talk. A couple of quick things. First of all, thanks again for your support, for continuing to help me out with this podcast by listening and keeping my numbers up. Also, I want to let you know that if you are interested in modular synthesizers and learning more about them, feel free to drop an email to the email address bookzero, that's BOOKZERO, at 20objects.com. And you can get a PDF copy of the first book of my series. It's called Book Zero, the four primary patches of modular synth, something like that. But it's a really interesting way to look at modular synthesis. So if you're into it, check that out. Otherwise, I'll check you next week. See you later. Bye.